The saloon doors swung open with a creak that cut through the drunken laughter like a knife. Every head turned toward the old farmer standing in the doorway, dirt still clinging to his worn boots, his weathered face carved with lines deeper than any canyon. He wasn't supposed to be here. Men like him, quiet, God-fearing souls who worked the land, they stayed away from places like this. But today was different. Just hours ago, 3 gunmen had ridden onto his property. The leader, a notorious drunk named Black Jack Corrigan, had pistol-whipped the farmer's son for looking at him wrong. They'd stolen his month's earnings, laughed as they burned his crop storage, and rode off thinking they'd broken just another helpless old man. They were wrong. What those fools didn't know was that this simple farmer had a past buried deeper than the bodies he'd left behind 20 years ago. Before he'd hung up his guns and found redemption in the soil, he was known by a different name, a name whispered in terror across every frontier town from Texas to Montana. The Devil of Dodge City. Now, as the old farmer's callous hand moved toward his coat, the saloon fell deathly silent. Black Jack's drunken grin faltered. He'd just awakened something that should have stayed buried forever. What happens when you push a reformed killer too far? Subscribe to find out how this farmer reminds the frontier why some devils never truly die. Drop a comment telling us what city and country you're watching from. 20 years ago, the name Devil wasn't just a nickname. It was a warning. Samuel Devil Maddox had been the fastest gun the frontier had ever seen. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, but the deadliest. While other gunslingers bragged in saloons about their kills, Maddox simply did the work. Clean, efficient, terrifying. He killed his first man at 16 when raiders murdered his family. By 20, he'd gunned down the entire gang responsible, all 7 of them in one blood-soaked week. By 25, his reputation had grown so dark that outlaws would abandon towns just hearing he was riding in. They called him the Devil because when he showed up, hell followed. But killing changes a man, carves pieces out of his soul until there's almost nothing left. The turning point came on a dusty road outside Santa Fe. Maddox had cornered his target, a cattle rustler named Jimmy Wells, in front of the man's wife and 3 children. The rustler begged, not for himself, but for his family. Please, he'd whispered, they need someone to care for them. Maddox pulled the trigger anyway. He always finished the job. But that night, lying in his bedroll under the stars, he heard those children crying in his memory. For the first time in years, Samuel Maddox felt something he thought he'd killed long ago: shame. He made a decision that would change everything. At dawn, he rode to the nearest river, pulled both his Colt .45s from their holsters, and hurled them into the rushing water. He watched them sink, disappearing into the murky depths like the man he used to be. Then he found a small plot of land far from anywhere he'd made his reputation, bought it with blood money he swore would be his last, and became what his father had been before the violence, a farmer. For 20 years, he kept his head down. He married a good woman named Martha, had a son named Daniel, and built a life from honest sweat. He attended church every Sunday, helped his neighbors during harvest, and never spoke of the past. The calluses on his trigger finger slowly faded, replaced by the rougher calluses of a man who worked the earth. Some nights, Martha would wake to find him staring out the window, and she'd know he was fighting old ghosts. But she never asked, and he never told. Their unspoken agreement was simple. The past stayed buried as long as nothing disturbed it. Samuel Maddox had convinced himself that the devil was dead, drowned in that river along with his guns. But evil has a way of finding men who've tried to leave it behind. And when Black Jack Corrigan and his gang rode onto the Maddox farm that fateful morning, they didn't just rob an old farmer. They cracked open a grave that should have stayed sealed forever. The devil was about to rise again. The morning had started like any other, peaceful, quiet, blessed. Samuel was mending fence posts while Daniel, his 19-year-old son, hauled water from the well. Martha hummed hymns in the kitchen, preparing their midday meal. The sun hung warm and golden over their modest farm, and for a moment, Samuel felt that rare sensation of complete contentment. Then he heard the hoofbeats. 3 riders crested the hill, moving with the lazy confidence of men who feared nothing. Samuel's hands stopped working. Something ancient stirred in his gut, an instinct he'd thought long dead. These weren't travelers seeking directions. These were predators. The leader was a large man with a whiskey-bloated face and a silver-studded gun belt, Black Jack Corrigan, though Samuel didn't know the name yet. His companions flanked him like jackals following a wolf, a rail-thin sharpshooter called Snake-Eye Pete, and a hulking brute everyone knew as Hammer. Well, Black Jack slurred, swaying slightly in his saddle. Look at this pitiful spread. You call this a farm, old man? Samuel straightened slowly, keeping his voice level. Can I help you, gentlemen? Gentlemen! Black Jack roared with laughter. You hear that, boys? He thinks we're gentlemen. His eyes, bloodshot and mean, fixed on Samuel. We're thirsty and hungry, and we take what we want. Daniel stepped forward, young and foolish and brave. My father asked you politely. State your business or ride on. The words were barely out of his mouth when Black Jack's pistol flashed out, crashing into Daniel's temple. The boy crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Daniel! Martha screamed tall from the house. Samuel's world went red. Every muscle in his body coiled, ready to spring, but he forced himself still. The devil whispered in his ear, you could kill all three before they even draw. But Samuel silenced it. He was a farmer now, a Christian, a man of peace. He knelt beside his unconscious son, checking the wound. Blood streamed down Daniel's face, but he was breathing. That's for disrespecting his betters, Black Jack spat. Now, where's your money? Samuel pointed toward the house with a trembling hand, hiding the rage boiling in his veins. Kitchen, coffee tin on the shelf. Take it and go. Hammer ransacked the house while Snake-Eye Pete set fire to the storage barn, a month's worth of grain going up in smoke. They found Samuel's savings, laughed at the pitiful amount, and pocketed it anyway. Black Jack leaned down from his saddle, breathing whiskey fumes into Samuel's face. Thanks for the hospitality, farmer. Maybe next time we come through, we'll pay a longer visit. Your wife looks mighty fine. They rode off laughing, leaving destruction in their wake. Samuel held his bleeding son and felt something crack inside him. The dam he'd built for 20 years finally breaking. The devil didn't just whisper anymore. Samuel rode into town as the sun began its descent, painting the sky the color of spilled blood. He'd left Daniel in Martha's care, the boy conscious now but with a gash that would scar. Before leaving, Samuel had gone to the old oak tree behind the barn and dug with his bare hands until he found the oilskin-wrapped package he'd buried 20 years ago. Inside were his guns, not the ones he'd thrown in the river, but a backup pair he'd kept just in case. Even when trying to become a new man, some part of him had known this day might come. The leather holsters felt foreign at first, then terrifyingly familiar, like greeting an old friend you'd sworn never to see again. He'd asked around town quietly. 3 men, big one with silver studs, thin one, and a brute. Where? The bartender's eyes had gone wide, recognizing something in Samuel's face that made him answer without hesitation. McGraw's Saloon. They had drunk and bragging about robbing some farmer. Now Samuel stood in the doorway of that saloon, and the world seemed to slow down. The place went silent as a tomb. Black Jack sat at a corner table, bottle in hand, still laughing about his morning's work. Snake-Eye Pete was at the bar, and Hammer played cards with locals too intimidated to leave. That's him, someone whispered. That's the farmer they robbed. Black Jack's laughter died. He squinted at Samuel, then grinned. You got some stones, old man, coming hey, hoping to beg for your money back. He started to stand, hand drifting toward his pistol. I already told you what I'm gonna do next time My name, Samuel interrupted, his voice quiet as a grave, is Samuel Maddox. The effect was instantaneous. Snake-Eye Pete's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The card players scrambled away from Hammer. Even Black Jack, drunk as he was, felt ice water replace the whiskey in his veins. That's impossible, Black Jack stammered. The devil died years ago. Everyone knows. I tried to die, Samuel said, stepping into the saloon. His hands hung loose at his sides, hovering near the gun grips. Buried that man deep. Became something better. But you hurt my son. burn my livelihood, threaten my wife. His eyes, once kind and weathered, now burned with something ancient and terrible. You dug up the devil, Jack. Now you're gonna meet him. Black Jack's hand jerked toward his gun, whiskey making him stupid and slow. Snake Eye Pete went for his rifle. Hammer reached for the knife in his boot. There were dead men before their weapons cleared leather. The sound of Samuel's guns was like thunder in the confined space. 4 shots so fast they sounded like 2. Black Jack took one in the chest, one in the head. Snake Eye Pete spun backward over the bar. Hammer's knife clattered to the floor as he collapsed, a red flower blooming on his shirt. 3 seconds. 3 bodies. The devil had returned. The gun smoke hung in the air like ghosts, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Samuel stood amid the carnage, his guns still raised, and felt the familiar emptiness flooding back, that hollow place where his soul used to be. The 3 men lay dead at impossible angles, their weapons fired, their eyes wide with the shock of meeting death before they'd even seen it coming. The old Samuel, the farmer, would have felt horror at what he'd just done. But the devil felt nothing except a grim satisfaction. Justice delivered. Accounts settled. Then he heard the whisper from the corner. Dear God, he really was the devil of Dodge City. Samuel slowly lowered his guns and looked around the saloon. Every face stared at him with a mixture of awe and terror. These were his neighbors, people he'd helped during harvest, folks who'd sat beside him in church. But now they looked at him like he was a monster. Because he was. The sheriff appeared in the doorway, gun drawn but uncertain. He'd seen the whole thing through the window. 3 against 1, and the 3 had drawn first. Please self-defense. But the fear in his eyes said he was wondering whether to thank Samuel or arrest him. Samuel. The sheriff began. I'm done here, Samuel said quietly, holstering his guns. They drew first. It's finished. He walked toward the door, and the crowd parted like water around a stone. As he passed the sheriff, he paused. Tell Martha. Tell her I'll be home by dark. Tell her it's over. But both men knew that was a lie. Samuel rode home slowly, watching the sunset paint the land he loved. He'd protected his family, yes, avenged the wrong done to them. But at what cost? For 20 years, he'd built a life on redemption, on the belief that a man could change. In 3 seconds, he'd proven that some things never truly die, they just wait. When he reached the farm, Martha was waiting on the porch. She didn't run to him. She just stood there, her face unreadable, and Samuel knew she'd already heard. News traveled fast. Is it done? She asked. It's done. She nodded slowly, and in her eyes, he saw the question she was too afraid to ask. Which man is coming home to me tonight? The farmer or the devil? Samuel dismounted and walked toward her, and for the first time since the river 20 years ago, he didn't know the answer. Some devils, once awakened, can never fully sleep again. If this story gripped you, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another tale from the frontier. Tell us in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? And what would you have done in Samuel's place? Drop your thoughts below. More legendary stories coming soon.